From Cracker Jack to Pop Rocks, junk food has been America's guilty pleasure for over a century. But here's the twist. The gimmicks often became legends, while the healthier options faded into history. In this breakdown, you'll see which decade produced the most enduring brands, which old favorites made shocking comebacks by 2025, and how modern health trends are reshaping the entire snack market. Tell us in the comments which forgotten snack you de-revive if you could. To start, we have to go back to the early 1900s, when industrial America first turned sugar and salt into national icons. The birth of American junk food, 1900s. The story of American junk food in the 1900s begins with the country's first foray into national snack culture. For the first time, mass production and distribution made it possible for the same treat to appear in homes across the nation, not just at a local sweet shop. This shift reshaped how Americans thought about indulgence. Suddenly, a snack wasn't just local or seasonal, it could become a cultural symbol. One of the first big names was Cracker Jack, which had its public debut at the Chicago World's Fair in the late 19th century before being repackaged for mass distribution in the early 1900s. A simple mix of popcorn, peanuts, and caramel syrup, it gained fame almost as much for its branding as for its taste. By the time Ballparks snacks became part of American tradition, Cracker Jack was synonymous with summer afternoons and the crack of a bat. Yet by 2025, it survives mostly as a nostalgic purchase, bundled into baseball stadium packs or bought because someone remembers an old memory. In grocery stores, however, it's been quietly pushed aside, overshadowed by flashier modern options. Cracker Jack is a case study in survival by heritage, proving that cultural ties can extend relevance long past the point when a snack stops being mainstream. While Cracker Jack was cementing its place in Ballparks, another product took off with an entirely different promise: convenience. Jell-O was marketed in 1900, and in 1902 an ad in Ladies' Home Journal boldly declared it America's most famous dessert. The timing could not have been better. At a moment when American households were fascinated by efficiency and modernity, gelatin packets offered a dessert that seemed new, scientific, and easy. Enthusiastic magazines pushed it into households nationwide, even suggesting bizarre recipes like gelatin molded around meats, vegetables, or seafood. For a generation, Jell-O was modernity on the table, but its decline was long and steady. By 2025, it manages a presence in hospital trays, ironic nostalgia cookbooks, or as the base of college party shots. The once revolutionary dessert is more cultural relic than grocery staple. Its story shows how quickly novelty can fade if a brand doesn't reinvent itself alongside consumer taste. In the same decade, another experiment proved much more enduring. Milton Hershey, a Pennsylvania caramel maker, perfected his milk chocolate formula and in 1905 established the Hershey's Chocolate Company. Hershey didn't just create a candy bar, he built a blueprint for an American food empire. With factories, worker housing, and a model town bearing his name, Hershey's became more than a brand. It became part of the national identity. The chocolate bar itself evolved into a cornerstone product. And over the course of the century, Hershey's added Reese's, Kit Kats through partnerships, and countless variations tied to holidays and limited editions. Unlike Jell-O's collapse or Cracker Jack's relegation to novelty packaging, Hershey's demonstrated the long-term value of scale and adaptation. It weathered sugar shortages, wars, and changing palates, always managing to expand its reach. In 2025, Hershey's stands as America's first and most enduring chocolate empire, a status it first claimed in the 1900s. Put side by side, these three stories reveal the choices facing early junk food pioneers. Cracker Jack leaned on heritage and nostalgia, surviving largely through tradition rather than reinvention. Jell-O relied on novelty and cultural frenzy, only to falter when fashions changed and its odd recipes lost their appeal. Hershey's chose empire building, using consistency and expansion to create staying power. These paths represent the foundational strategies that have shaped the junk food industry for over a century. Survive on culture, thrive on trend, or dominate through reinvention. It's also worth remembering the smaller details of this era that get buried under chocolate and popcorn. In 1905, the Tootsie Roll appeared, sold in a small individually wrapped taffy stick for just a cent. It wasn't as headline-grabbing as Hershey's, but that single innovation, wrapping candies one by one, changed ideas about hygiene and packaging, giving Americans the sense of safety and consistency they would come to expect from all mass-produced snacks. Like Cracker Jack, it was humble in design. Like Hershey's, it endured in part because of its adaptability across generations. By the end of the first decade of the 20th century, the map for junk food's future was already established. Americans had shown that they would keep buying a product tied to nostalgia, chase after a trend that felt innovative, and reward companies that managed to blend quality with relentless expansion. Some of those names, like Hershey's, still tower over the modern marketplace. Others hang on only because traditions keep them alive. The core tension of that first snack war between novelty and endurance would play out again and again across the decades of American history. And although the 1900s might feel distant now, the lessons from those snacks are far from outdated. Today's viral hits on TikTok or Instagram echo Jell-O's moment in the magazines of 1902. The old-school, memory-driven pull of Cracker Jack looks a lot like the retro snack revivals we see pop up today. And Hershey's empire building is still the strategy of choice for the biggest food corporations around the world. The key question, then, is which of these pioneers shaped snack culture most enduringly in 2025? The nostalgic ballpark treat, the colorful gelatin once branded a miracle, or the chocolate empire that never went away? The answer becomes clearer when we step into the next decade, where America traded factories and fairs for war, shortages, and a new wave of sugary inventions that tested just how much indulgence the public could take. The 1910s, cupcakes, marshmallows, and the war on teeth. The 1910s marked the arrival of baked cakes, marshmallow spreads, and new candies that seemed to sweeten nearly every corner of American life. Factories were reaching higher capacity, and packaged foods were becoming normal in schools, workplaces, and even military rations. These weren't handmade confections from a neighborhood bakery anymore. They were industrial snacks built to last on shelves, designed for portability, and priced for everyday indulgence. By the end of the decade, names that would linger for more than a century were already competing for space in lunch boxes and corner stores. One of the first big players was Tastykakes, which launched in Philadelphia in 1914. Branded today as Tastykake, the company set itself apart by offering small, individually wrapped cakes that people could easily carry. Unlike the single loaf or large pie a family might take home from a bakery, these were designed as single-serve items. Wax paper wrapping made them feel fresher and more modern compared to bulk goods. The model worked especially well in the Northeast, where Tasty Baking Company built strong loyalty. Over a century later, in 2025, Tastykake still survives, though its market remains mostly regional. Philadelphia locals defend the brand with pride, but beyond its home territory, recognition drops off quickly. This is the defining difference between regional snack makers like Tastykake and national giants. Loyalty can sustain a brand locally, but only large-scale expansion creates a household name. That national-scale success came just a few years later, when Hostess introduced its first cupcakes in 1919. These early cakes were relatively simple compared to the decorated versions people would recognize later, but the concept of a uniform, mass-produced snack cake set the stage for everything Hostess would become. With strong distribution and the resources to expand far beyond one city, Hostess created the infrastructure that later allowed products like Twinkies to dominate shelves across America. Twinkies themselves would not arrive until the 1930s, but their foundation was here in 1919 with that first cupcake. Over the decades, Hostess built one of the most recognizable brands in American snack history. Even Bankruptcy in 2012 failed to erase it. Nostalgia, investor confidence, and social media brought the company back. By the 2020s, TikTok challenges boosted Twinkies as retro icons, making them curiosities for new generations rather than just familiar snack cakes. What started as a modest cupcake line in the 1910s grew into an empire, one that, even in 2025, continues to outpace rivals who never captured the same cultural foothold. But not every 1910s innovation focused on cakes. In Massachusetts, 1917 brought something new to the table: Marshmallow Fluff. Unlike chocolates or hard candies, Fluff was a spreadable sugar product that could be paired with peanut butter to make sandwiches. The Fluffernutter, created soon after its launch, was sticky, sweet, and a novelty in its time. Parents tolerated it as an occasional indulgence, while kids treated it as something special. Unlike Hostess, Fluff never achieved national dominance, but its survival tells another story. niche cult followings. In New England, Fluff became an identity marker as much as a food, tied to local pride and family tradition. By 2025, Fluff remains widely available on shelves, though more as a regional favorite and nostalgic purchase than a mainstream staple. Its persistence shows how some snacks endure not because they appeal to everyone, but because they carve out a specific corner of devotion strong enough to keep them in production for generations. Meanwhile, another brand approached sugar with an entirely different pitch. In 1912, peppermint Lifesavers arrived on the market as hard candies meant to freshen breath. Early Lifesavers weren't the round donut candies most people remember today. The signature hole didn't appear until 1925. In their original form, they were small, solid mints, marketed as wholesome and neat, a respectable, portable alternative to heavy chocolate. The irony, of course, was that these breath-freshening candies were loaded with sugar, another contributor to dental problems of the era. Yet they caught on quickly, and their cleverly practical identity helped them stand out. A century later, Lifesavers still sit on convenience store shelves, even if they've long since lost top billing to gum-based competitors or fruit-flavored brands like Skittles and Starburst. Their survival is modest but notable, proof that even small, functional positioning could grant a century-long seat in the candy aisle. Taken together, the 1910s gave us four very different models of survival. Tasty Cakes thrived in its home city but never scaled nationally, showing the power and limits of regional loyalty. Hostess began its journey toward national dominance, eventually cementing itself as one of the most enduring snack companies in history. Marshmallow Fluff defined how a quirky cult product could carve out longevity by sticking to a niche rather than chasing mass appeal. And Lifesavers illustrated how branding candy as practical, not just indulgent, could grant it staying power, even if it never returned to its earliest prominence. If there was one clear loser from this decade, it might have been American dentistry. By the late 1910s, sugar consumption was skyrocketing, and tooth decay became so common that dentists were practically guaranteed business. Some critics even dubbed the explosion of sweets the war on teeth. One line was clear. Sugar was not just a treat anymore, it was a fixture in the American diet, and it wasn't going anywhere. Looking at 2025, it's easy to see how each player fared in the long run. Hostess is the heavyweight, with Twinkies, Cupcakes, and spin-offs generating major revenue and cultural visibility. Tasty-Cake stays alive, but mostly in Philadelphia and surrounding regions, where loyalty matters more than national reach. Lifesavers are still here, but mostly as an afterthought in aisles dominated by gummies and chocolate bars. And Fluff, still prominent in New England, living on more as a nostalgic sandwich spread than a mainstream necessity. The 1910s didn't crown a single winner. It revealed the paths snack makers could take, from empire building to niche identity, and showed how each path could carry a brand across decades. But the real turning point wasn't in spreads or pastries. By the following decade, candy makers would begin thinking bigger, much bigger. Some weren't content with stocking shelves. They wanted to captivate entire towns with inventive stunts. The question wasn't just whether Americans would buy more candy, but how you could get them to chase after it in the first place. The 1920s. Candy bars take flight. The 1920s brought a new kind of spectacle to the candy world. The rise of the candy bar as both a treat and a cultural event. No longer content to simply sit on shelves, these products arrived with bold marketing, flashy gimmicks, and new flavors designed to capture attention in an increasingly crowded market. This wasn't just about satisfying hunger anymore. It was about making a brand unforgettable. One of the most dramatic examples came in 1920, when the Curtis Candy Company staged a publicity stunt that literally dropped Baby Ruth bars from the sky. Airplanes flew over towns in more than 40 states, scattering the candy to people below. Children grabbed them off the ground, adults pocketed handfuls, and the stunt made national headlines. In one move, Baby Ruth went from obscurity to instant name recognition. The wild promotion summed up the attitude of the Roaring Twenties: excess, risk, and spectacle in equal measure. The candy itself had a respectable run, but the marketing outshone the actual product. By 2025, Baby Ruth survives mostly on nostalgia and retro branding, struggling to keep a foothold against faster-selling competitors. What began as a candy worthy of aerial delivery now often sits quietly in discount bins or hidden on the bottom racks of convenience stores, remembered more for its debut than its staying power. While Baby Ruth chased attention from the skies, another invention of the 1920s took a very different route: quiet persistence. In 1928, H.B. Reese, a former Hershey dairy employee, experimented with combining peanut butter filling and milk chocolate. The result was the first Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. Simple in design and inexpensive to produce, it created a perfect balance of sweet and salty that quickly caught on. At a time when peanuts were accessible to farmers and Hershey had made chocolate more widely available, the combination felt familiar and new at the same time. Reese began small, but the cup's popularity grew steadily through the decades. After his death, his family sold the brand to Hershey, and over time it became one of Hershey's central products. Nearly a century later, Reese's stands at the very top of America's candy market, remaining the best-selling brand by 2025. Every Halloween survey shows Reese's at the top of the trading pile, and its countless spin-offs, from seasonal pumpkin and egg shapes to collaborations with ice creams and cereals, extend its reach well beyond the candy aisle. Reese's success suggests that sometimes the simplest idea, executed consistently, can become virtually untouchable. But the candy boom of the 1920s didn't stop with peanut butter. The decade also brought the rise of coconut-filled treats. Mounds appeared in 1920, followed by Almond Joy in 1923, marketed as its sibling bar with just one small addition, an almond perched on top. It became a running joke among candy fans that Almond Joy was Mounds with a hat, but the humor belied the bar's persisted. They introduced something different in an era dominated by nougat and caramel. For many Americans who would never see the Caribbean, coconut offered a taste of the exotic. The strategy worked. Neither Mounds nor Almond Joy reached the cultural dominance of Reese's, but both secured steady, loyal audiences. Even in 2025, they still occupy shelf space, anchored more by consistency and brand recognition than marketing firework. In a candy world where most new products fail quickly, their survival counts as a quiet victory. Innovation wasn't limited to chocolates. In 1923, a teenager named Frank Epperson patented a frozen dessert he had stumbled upon years earlier when he left a sugary drink mixture outside on a cold night. The liquid froze around the wooden stick and the popsicle was born. Marketed as a novelty for children, Popsicles quickly caught on with their colorful appearance, refreshing taste, and fun shape. Unlike candy bars, which competed constantly for new audiences, Popsicles leaned into their natural seasonality. They thrived every summer and became a staple of childhood. A century later, they remain a classic treat, their formula changing little. Newer frozen brands and healthier alternatives nibble away at the market, but Popsicles still dominate school events, poolside snacks, and quick grocery pickups. Their longevity lies in never losing sight of their primary role: cheap, cold fun on a hot day. Still, for every enduring brand created in the 1920s, there were dozens that disappeared. The decade was flooded with experiments. Nut clusters, caramel blends, and cereal-coated chocolates rolled out by entrepreneurs hoping to catch the next big wave. Few survived beyond their first burst of attention. Looking back from 2025, only a small handful, Reese's, Almond Joy, Mounds, Baby Ruth, and Popsicles, emerged as recognizable survivors. Each followed a different survival path. Reese's through unmatched flavor and a perfect pairing, Almond Joy and Mounds through steady niche loyalty, Popsicles through seasonal dominance, and Baby Ruth through spectacle followed by slow decline. When measured against modern results, the winners are clear. Reese's reigns as America's favorite candy, shaping not only the Halloween trade, but also entire sections of snack culture. Popsicles continue to fill freezers as a children's classic. Mounds and Almond Joy persist without making headlines, quietly serving their fans. Baby Ruth, once a headline star, is now a fading footnote, remembered more for its attention-grabbing debut than for consistent longevity. The 1920s proved that a bold launch might grab attention, but lasting cultural endurance depended on flavor, branding, and adaptability. What makes Reese's dominance particularly striking is how universal it has become. In a landscape where Americans argue endlessly over their favorite colas, chips, or burgers, peanut butter and chocolate inspire almost no debate. Polls repeatedly confirm it is the candy most likely to be hoarded, traded, or stolen from trick-or-treat bags. Parents sneak them before kids even notice, and seasonal variations generate excitement every holiday. If Hershey's had established industrial chocolate in the 1900s, Reese's defined how a candy could evolve into something larger, a cultural shorthand, and a dynasty that borders on untouchable in 2025. The broader lesson of the 1920s is that experimentation, marketing spectacle, and clever pairings shaped the candy bar industry into a permanent part of American life. Some treats soared, others sputtered, but the core idea that a small, affordable sweet could spark joy persisted through prosperity and later through hardship. That hardship would arrive at the decade's end, when the stock market collapsed and the nation's sugar-fueled excess ran headlong into economic despair. Surprisingly, instead of crushing the snack industry, the Depression years gave it new momentum. Cheap indulgence became a form of comfort, and treats invented in the 1920s proved resilient under pressure. The next decade wouldn't simply continue the candy craze, it would transform it under the weight of survival. The crash of 1929 ushered in a decade defined by scarcity, but in the middle of job losses and empty wallets, one category quietly thrived: junk food. The 1930s forced American families to cut back on nearly everything: new clothes, evenings out, and even basic groceries. But cheap sweets and salty snacks became the exception. A nickel could still provide a moment of indulgence. And in that small exchange of coins for comfort, junk food became deeply entrenched in American culture. Among the earliest icons of this era was the Twinkie, created in 1930. Its concept was simple: a soft sponge cake with a banana cream filling, small enough to be eaten on the go and cheap enough that almost anyone could buy it. While it might have seemed like another passing fad at first, Twinkies adapted in a way that guaranteed their survival. When World War II caused banana shortages, the filling was reformulated with vanilla cream, a switch that never reversed. Generations grew up with that flavor instead, transforming it into the snack's signature identity. In hindsight, it wasn't just a substitution, it was the change that secured the Twinkies' place in history. Even when Hostess collapsed in 2012 and the cakes appeared to vanish, their cultural pull was undeniable. Investors revived the brand almost immediately, knowing nostalgia alone could bring consumers back. By 2025, Twinkies are still one of Hostess's flagships, proving that a product born at the height of the Depression continues to survive through resilience and reinvention. The 1930s also marked the moment when salty snacks became central to everyday life. Herman Lay started selling potato chips throughout the American South, eventually introducing what became Lay's potato chips in 1938. Potatoes fried into thin slices weren't new. They had been made in restaurants as far back as the 19th century. But Lay figured out how to make them portable. Packaged in wax paper bags that preserved freshness, potato chips became something anyone could bring home or add to lunch. For families worried about money, a small bag delivered variety and a sense of fun without adding much cost. The effect rippled outward. By the 1960s, Herman Lay's business merged with the Frito Company, creating the Frito-Lay juggernaut that today controls nearly 60% of the U.S. salty snack market. Those chips, born as an affordable comfort food during the Depression, eventually became a cornerstone of PepsiCo's global reach. In 2025, Lay's is sold in more than 200 countries, with flavors tailored to local tastes, from simple salted chips in the U.S. to shrimp and seaweed varieties in Asia. A snack meant to ease hardship turned into a worldwide industry. On the sweet side, Mars used the decade to expand in ways that still shape candy aisles today. Around 1930, the company launched Snickers, a bar that combined nougat, caramel, peanuts, and milk chocolate into a dense, calorie-heavy package. Milky Way, another early Mars creation marketed in the early 1930s, was pitched as a cheaper substitute for malted milkshakes. Both became popular precisely because they seemed to provide substance at a low cost. When bread lines grew longer and meals were thin, bars like Snickers and Milky Way stood in as makeshift sources of energy. For factory workers or students, it was easy to justify buying one as lunch. These weren't just treats. They walked the line between snack and survival food, and in doing so, they became part of the daily rhythm of Depression-era life. By the time the economy recovered, Mars had secured a reputation not just for indulgent candy, but for everyday sustenance disguised in a wrapper. The underlying question hung over every transaction in the 1930s. How could people justify spending scarce money on non-essential food? The answer came from psychology as much as from hunger. Strict budgeting meant luxuries were rare, but candy bars or potato chips still felt accessible. Little by little, families carved out nickels and dimes for that one moment of pleasure. Advertisers leaned into this by framing snacks as a way to boost energy, brighten morale, or simply treat yourself despite the times. The penny spent on candy didn't feel wasteful. It felt essential in its own way, a defense against monotony and despair.